Food is more than just what's on our plate. It's the places where it's grown, it's the people who grow it, and so much more. Join me, Janice Person, your host, on Grounded by the Farm every other week as we talk about the foods we love. Everybody, this week I'm in northwestern Ohio, and this is the first time I've ever had the nerve to interview a family member, which seems so real, and it just sort of striking me now. My brother, his wife Elizabeth, and a bunch of friends in this area run a co-op, and they've been doing it for decades now, right, Ray?
We're starting our 20th year.
Oh, wow. It really is like right at 20 years. Okay. And so I wanted to talk to my brother because I think when I look at Facebook and my brother posts what they're doing on the farm this week, or that they're going to have bacon from their pig or something, all these friends seem to think like this is the greatest place in the world. And yet very few of us do this kind of work to make this stuff happen. And my brother and his wife and all their friends have worked on it steadily for decades now. So it didn't come all overnight. It grew from a garden in their backyard into this really almost self-sufficient in most areas of your food. Is that right?
Yeah. So in terms of groceries, we buy grain products, bread, pasta, rice, that kind of thing. And paper products, toilet paper, and dairy products, milk, cheese, such. So
yeah, coffee.
But we coffee, and we rarely buy meat or eggs or even vegetables. Sometimes we'll buy things that we don't have in season, like lettuce. But we live off of the farm for the most part. Most of our meals are everything's from the farm, unless it's got dairy or grain in it.
Yeah. And it really is amazing. We had pork for dinner last night that was from the farm. You guys, I know some years you have great crops of some things. And I remember one year there was a bad potato year. And so when we were at Mom's house and we made potatoes, you were just so excited to have potatoes because you hadn't even really thought about the fact you don't have them. So when friends look at what you're doing on Facebook, this is where they all think they were going to come when something catastrophic like the Walking Dead and stuff, like everybody says when the zombies apocalypse happens, they're all coming to Ray's. And I want to make sure first I'm on the list for the zombie apocalypse.
Well, it's a short list. It's a short list. But when the zombies come, we'll figure it out.
Okay, so let's talk about what you're doing right now. So we're at planting time, sort of, bad weather. But how do you look at the seasonality of the farm?
So we usually start planting even in mid-March.
Okay.
We have an agreement with a greenhouse where we get our plants earlier than they're willing to sell to most people because we know we're taking a lot of risk, and a lot of people don't really understand that. So we often will try to plant broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower, maybe kale from seedlings mid to late March. This year that didn't happen. It's been too wet and cold. But we have already gotten in the ground onion plants, leeks, and some cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. It's not doing real well. But we have some carrots coming up. We have potatoes that are just now breaking the surface. And we've planted parsnips and rutabagas and kohlrabi and beets and turnips and some lettuces. And yeah, so that's our spring garden. But it's well over a month behind where we normally are.
Yeah. It's just been cool and damp.
Yep.
Okay. And a lot of those were brassica plants. We've talked about brassicas a few times, but part of the reason you plant some of that early is because the bugs can really be hard on them, and they grow well in cooler weather compared to like a tomato. You would never want to plant a tomato early.
Yeah. So, and for us, too often our broccoli bolts when it gets too hot. So yes, you want to make sure you get it in early enough that you get a good crop. I'm doubtful that that's going to happen this year, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Sometimes you have great crops in the spring, sometimes not so great. Every year something fails. Every year something is like a bumper crop. So
yeah. So you have asparagus that's year after year. Do you have other crops that are going to be perennials?
Yes. So we've got, I think it's about 300 strawberry plants and a big asparagus plot. And we have some rhubarb.
Yeah.
Everything else we plant annually.
How many acres is the garden?
The garden's just a little over a half acre that's actually cultivated.
Okay.
And we do succession planting, so we get 2 crops on most of it.
Okay. That's a lot of land. I mean, you think about 2 crops, it would be about the size of the football field you're farming over the season. It's just all of it is half of a football field, and you're planting it at least twice.
Yep. Now, we have 12 shares in the garden, and that's really more like 16 families. And so it's a lot of work, but there's also a lot of people to share in the work. So that's the idea. And there's no way Elizabeth and I can eat all that food. So even we end up giving away food sometimes to family and friends when we have too much of stuff anyway.
Yeah. So how do you determine what a share is? And what do people put in as a share owner in the co-op? Because it's like most of us haven't participated in co-ops other than like REI or something where if I'm a member, I paid a certain amount at some point and I get a discount. This is really different.
This is very different from a CSA or a co-op where your membership, you just pay in and then you get so much of this or that. Because in our co-op, everyone has to provide labor. In fact, we divide the cost of the plants and the seeds and everything for the garden evenly between 11 shares, which means Elizabeth and I don't pay into that. But obviously, we provide the land and the equipment and so forth. So in one sense, we get our vegetables for free.
Because you have the land and the infrastructure.
And I do a lot of the work, more than a lot. But I mean, there are other members who do a lot of work too, because this is also something that we're doing. It's a lifestyle choice. So it's not, we could probably buy our food at a big box store a lot cheaper with less time involved than what we do. But the reason we're doing this is not necessarily about income, but it's a lifestyle choice based on issues around care of the environment, how migrant workers are often treated when it comes to vegetables, all of that. So we're doing the work that a lot of other people pay other people to do, and we're not always sure how those other people are treated. So there's a lot of stuff behind it. And of course, we get good exercise, and we actually enjoy working together. We get to talk a lot while we're digging potatoes or whatever.
Yeah, it's a great community of people. So you said it's like 15 shares on the book somewhere or something that you divide the food into. And that's mostly families or couples?
Well, there are some people who are single.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might have a family of 5 or 6.
Yeah.
I mean, so we range in age from, toddlers to 80. So, I mean, it's hard to generalize about who we are and so forth. And we don't keep a real close accounting of how many hours everybody is putting in. For the most part, that works itself out well because we're all committed to the project and we all become good friends and we care for each other and we watch out for each other. So if someone is hospitalized for a long period of time or something, we'll just cover for them and make sure.
It's funny you mentioned that because while you were out getting one of your dogs that had gone missing, Elizabeth and I were talking about a family that had a baby really prematurely.
Yes.
And knew they couldn't do the work. Like
they knew they couldn't do the work, and they said that they wanted to withdraw from the co-op because they didn't think they could pull their share. And the rest of us said, well, it doesn't matter because they had been planning on making their own baby food from organic produce from the farm and all of this stuff. And we just said, that's okay. You do what you can when you can, and we're going to keep you in the group and take care of you that way. So, yeah, the group can do that kind of thing. So, like I said, we don't really account for the hours because we're not too hung up on that as long as the work is getting done. And some people work more than other people. And, sometimes things just don't get done. And if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. So that's okay, too.
And part of it seems to me, having been out here and you guys were planting onions one time I was here, and you're like running the tiller for some other parts of and everybody is down on their hands and knees, and y'all don't have like the big transplanters, although I have a dream one for you. But you guys do most of it by hand or small gas driven tillers.
Yeah, my biggest piece of equipment is the pickup truck. The second biggest is a BCS tiller.
Yeah.
And that's it. So we do a lot of work by hand, but there's a lot of hands to do the work. And so it's not that bad. I mean, we even clean the manure out of the barn, and we do that by hand, one pitchfork at a time. And people kind of think we're crazy that we don't have a skid loader to come in and do all this, but we would actually have to redesign the whole barn to get it's an old barn. There's no way we could do that. So we'd have to redesign the barn so that we could do that. And, we get exercise this way. Most of us have kind of desk jobs. And so this is part of our way of getting some exercise.
It's a little therapeutic for some people. I remember some people pulling weeds and like going, no, I really just need to be out there pulling weeds today so I don't have to think about all those other things that are hitting at them and stuff, right?
Yep.
So, okay, we talked a little bit about the cool season varieties that you guys plant and stuff. Then you start moving into warm season. What all do you plant? And then what I want you to talk about is how you guys make this function for the year, because you put up a lot of stuff and you've had to give thought to how you're going to preserve food in various ways.
Right.
In order for it to really pay off for you year round. Like it's not just being functional as a garden. So
Right. We plant well over 50 different crops in the garden. So I'm not going to go through the entire list.
Exactly.
But obviously, we plant a lot. We'll plant 14 dozen Roma tomato plants. That's a lot of tomatoes. Well, if you plant that many, you have to be prepared to freeze or can a lot. And most of them get canned. But we do that. We plant
salsa here is pretty good.
The salsa is pretty good. Yeah. We'll plant 2 different plots. Each of our plots are 25 by 40 feet. So we'll plant 2 different plots of sweet corn. And again, we get a lot of sweet corn at one time. So you're not likely to eat it all. You're going to be freezing or canning some of it. So we plant a lot of different things, and I will say this: we plant crops that virtually none of us had eaten before we started planting them. So we have had to learn how to eat different crops. And what's interesting is when we have something new or someone comes in new, what we would end up doing is Google recipes, and when someone would find a really good recipe, we'd share it with everybody else. So we've been doing that long enough that we pretty much know what to do with some of these odd things that we had never really eaten before.
I'm going to say, honestly, one year when I came for Easter, y'all found more ways to use butternut squash than I thought was possible. I mean, like there was butternut squash everywhere. Because it was Easter by then, right? Like, so you guys have like, I don't know, is it root storage? Okay, you do some of that too, right?
Our farm is a historic Swiss Mennonite homestead. It was homesteaded in the 1850s. The house, the room that we're sitting in, was built in either the late 1850s or early 1960s. It was added to in the 1890s, and the barn was built in 1868. So the original house, yes, the basement's a root cellar. It was built for that. And it's not finished. You don't put furniture down there and a TV or anything. This is not that kind of basement. There's no man cave here. There's a root cellar. And we store we have 2 freezers in the basement. That's where we put our canned goods. And then just bins of things like potatoes and carrots and winter squash and so forth. So yeah,
keep them good as long as you can. In storage.
Yep. And in fact, I just ate the last of our onions, and some of the winter squash started going bad. But if it starts going bad, the pigs eat it, and that's okay too because they have to eat.
It's all comes full circle around this place. So we haven't talked about the animals, and I'm not sure I even know how you're doing the animals now. So The eggs were different, at least in the past, than the pigs. So people bought shares in pigs. Do they all have shares in pigs now?
Okay, so we have since we have different projects, and some of the people in the garden are actually vegan.
I thought so.
So I mean, which is great. In fact, the chef of a local restaurant, the Greenhorn, is a member of our co-ops, and it's a vegan restaurant. We all like to eat there. So we have pork, and we have lamb, and we have chicken and eggs. Now, with the chicken and eggs, the way that co-op works is there are 6 shares, so we divide the cost 6 ways. Everyone gets a night of the week. We get a free night. So we pay for one night, and we get a free night. So I only do chicken duty on Fridays and Saturdays, and other people have other days. And we come and we feed them and water them and collect eggs, and whatever we collect, we take home. And our assumption is that over the course of a year, it comes out pretty even, and that's close enough.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if someone's gone on vacation, that's fine. We just swap stuff around, or someone just gives it up, and that works well. With the pigs, we were buying feeder pigs at one time, and we knew we'd get how many pigs and how many sides we had, and all of that worked. That was a little bit neater and tidier. We're breeding our own now. It's a heritage breed, American guinea hog with a little cooney in it. And so we don't always know how many pigs we're going to have year to year. And so I pretty much can figure out how much cost per head I have. And then we make sure that the co-op is covering the feed cost. And then we're butchering them our own these days. Or you can pay a local butcher to butcher them if you would prefer to do that. The same for the lambs. I've pretty much figured out how much cost I have in terms of hay to feed the entire herd. And that's kind of divided up. And I figure out what the cost is per head of lamb. And we go that route. So those co-ops work a little differently. And as you can imagine, I've gotten pretty good with the spreadsheet, keeping the budget and all of that. So I have some idea how all of this works. So yeah, we make a little money on the farm, and we have a lot of people who are providing labor because they're part of the co-op, and this is part of their farm, and they come and go, especially in the barn and the garden, and it works pretty well most days.
So one of the things that's probably more unique about the way you guys run things than the way most people have seen things done is that most people are used to seeing produce boxes or something like that. In your farm, people actually come and collect their own, like as their...
So it's a combination of things. So right now we're doing asparagus, and that needs to be picked every day. And so we have a schedule that was sent out, and you're assigned a day, and you come out and all the asparagus you pick, that's yours, and you take it home and do with it whatever. Strawberries we'll pick every other day. There will be a schedule. We'll have 4 shares picking every other day in a rotation, so that works well. Some things we can do where we just harvest twice a week. So half of us work Monday nights, half of us work Thursday nights. We plant, we weed, we harvest. I mean, whatever needs to be done during those nights. If we harvest, we actually do have bins that we will divide the harvest up and deliver the shares to those who are not there. So we get fresh vegetables twice a week when it's producing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's a little bit like a CSA, except you're doing a lot more labor.
A lot more labor. We didn't mention how many sheep you have or how many chickens you have. And those are both a lot compared, people talk about backyard chickens and they have a dozen. How many chickens do you have now? And you have both layers and broilers.
Okay, so every year I buy a straight run of 100 chicks. So theoretically, I would have 50 broilers and 50 hens from that straight run. So I probably have right now about 80 hens. That'd be my guess. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't keep an accurate count. I've got a number of roosters that run around with them because they're on lookout. They're all free-range chickens. So I would guess somewhere around 80 hens. The 100 chicks will arrive later this month. And we usually end up butchering, you lose some chicks. We usually end up butchering about 40 cockerels every fall, and usually somewhere around 20 or 30 hens in the fall, the old hens. And so every year we're replacing the old hens with new hens, and we end up with some soup meat, and then we end up with some other meat. And so that's just divided equally among those shares.
And I can't remember. Do you do different breeds for one year versus the next?
Yes. So we always make sure that the breeds are different enough that I can just look at them and know which ones are the old
Which
hens
year
to
they
butcher
are.
this fall. So that's the way we handle that.
Yeah. And so you actually butcher here. You built a summer kitchen, or you worked on a summer kitchen. I can't remember how
with the chickens, we actually take them somewhere else, because when you have the professional plucking equipment and all this, it just makes it go so much faster. So we're still paying someone to do that. Yeah. But we have been butchering the last 2 years the pork and lamb ourselves.
Yeah. So how many sheep would you be butchering then? Because there's a lot of sheep out there. There's a lot of lambs out there.
Okay, so we have 11 ewes and a ram. And right now, I think there's about 22 lambs running around. And I will actually sell some of the lambs to a friend who also has a similar kind of farm, although they do a CSA, and it's a little more income producing.
Mm-hmm.
But at weaning, I will sell him some lambs, and then what is left over is what we will use within our co-op, because I don't market stuff directly to the public, because that's just one more project. So the meat stays pretty much in the co-op unless I sell lambs at weaning to this friend or something like that. So.
Yeah. And you give plenty of eggs to our niece in the area and stuff like that. You take care of family.
Certain
that's
times
nearby.
of the year, we've got abundant eggs, and we're trying to use
Find
eggs in
homes
every dish we can imagine. And yeah.
So one of the pieces that I think, how do you decide what kind of animals you wanted to have on the farm? And did it grow over time?
Well, the first year we just had chickens, and none of us knew much about them. So then soon after that, I did some goats. I wasn't real happy with that. I did a different breed of sheep. We bought feeder pigs. There's been some discussion along the way about this. My assumption was that the goats and sheep were kind of my own project, and I started it that way. And in some ways, it's still kind of that way, because I figure out how much I have in each head, and I make sure that when I sell lambs at weaning, I can cover that cost. And then when I sell the meat to people within the co-op, which is not really selling since they're doing a lot of the work, that I make sure I cover those costs. So I make a little money on the sheep. I make a little money because I sell a lot of eggs. I make a little money on the pork. Sometimes we'll have some pork left over, and I might sell it to someone. But most of the time, stuff stays in the co-op.
Yeah.
But it is set up in such a way that it at least covers the cost.
Yeah. And you guys didn't set this up as a commercial entity. It was more community-based, and it was more knowing what you've produced and how it was produced and all of those kind of things.
Right. I mean, what we've done, it's not generating income that would support us because we're not selling beyond the co-op members, and the co-op members are getting it for pretty close to cost because they're providing so much labor.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a full-time job. In that sense, I don't need the income. And there's no way I could do what I'm doing without all the labor that the co-op provides.
Right.
So,
well, and just getting into it, I mean, I think a lot of people think that this would be an incredible way to live, but you have to figure out how to get into it. And you guys didn't do this when you were 25. Like, you didn't start immediately doing this. You slowly worked up, and you were in this community for a while talking about these kind of topics with friends and deciding this may be something you would be interested in trying before you actually figured out okay, we have the capital here for the land and the farm. We can do this.
We actually had friends who were committed to the idea before we bought the farm.
Exactly.
So in our first year, we were one of 5 families, and the garden was a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And we started with chickens, and it expanded from there. The goals that we had from the beginning included providing quality food for ourselves.
Yep.
And for us, that included organic methods, to improve wildlife habitat, and to build community. So
yeah, that's a good set of 3 goals.
Yeah, and we've done pretty well on that. The one thing that I would say that has surprised me the most is that we envisioned that we would do certain things in terms of improving wildlife habitat that we never got around to doing.
Yeah.
But we also learned that to a large degree we didn't have to do that, because we created various microenvironments that brought back a lot of wildlife that was kind of surprising to us in certain ways.
Yeah.
So we met that goal by just having a variety of projects, pasture, hayfield, the stuff outside the pasture that didn't get mowed all year, so that we had a lot more ground nesting birds, and the barn swallows moved back in the barn for the first time. And I mean, there was a bunch of things like that happened that we just did not expect because we didn't have that kind of experience.
Well, I had asked you about the size of the garden, but we really didn't talk about the fact that you have pasture land and you have an area, a hayfield. So, and some of it, is it up against a creek, or
it's
a part of a watershed?
It's a 20-acre farm. There's a ditch. This was swamp, and the ditch was dug to drain the swamp.
Okay.
So there's a ditch that runs along the edge of the farm. And, so we have about 13 acres of hay, about 3 acres of pasture, and then the buildings and the garden sit on the rest.
Yeah. And it really is sort of beautifully picturesque, unless the weeds get out of control.
Well, what is a weed? I mean, that's... So when the thistles are definitely a weed in the garden.
Hard one.
That's a hard
one.
one. But if we pick the
they
thistles and we throw them over the fence, the sheep and goats they'll just love them. They'll eat them up. So you don't find thistles in the pasture. You don't. They're just not there.
Yeah.
So weeds are plants that are you wish they were in a different place.
Yeah.
So
I've seen some thistles that have bright, beautiful purple flowers, and they look kind of like goth flowers, sort of.
Well, and some of those actually bloom in between the pasture fence and the road, and the goldfinches love them.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to let some of them go.
Yeah. Out on the ditch along the roadside.
Sure. So I mean, they have their place,
And you guys have some wildflowers here and there. I've seen some black-eyed Susans and different kinds of flowers here and there. And I should have told people you have a purple barn.
Well, it's technically Swiss red, but it faded from Swiss red into kind of purple. But yes, it is kind of purple right now.
It is notable. And okay, so the big pieces were to provide food for yourselves and your families, the original partners.
Yes.
And then to have this positive impact on the wildlife. And we've already discussed how much food you get off of it and the wildlife.
Right.
And then the community piece. This is very different. And in today's world of the pandemic, I think a lot of people want to create that sense of community. And maybe you don't always know how, but creating a sense of community. Everybody doesn't go to the same church. Or do you?
No.
So
there's
you have
a
people
variety
coming
of
in
people
from various places, and some come for a year or two and find maybe it doesn't fit for them.
Yep. And then some, John and Sally have been here all 20 years with us. So people come and go. Some people stay for really long times. One thing that I will say in relationship to the pandemic is when everything was locked down, agricultural workers were essential workers. So people were still coming out to work, and we felt very confident that we could safely social distance because we were working outside. And the farm was one of the few places some of us were having any kind of social interaction outside of our families, outside of, the family we live in the same house with.
Yeah.
This was the only place we were getting that kind of interaction. And that was really meaningful. So that was important for us as a group. So when it comes to building community these last 2 years, that's kind of been emphasized in some interesting ways because it became so important for so many of us to get over the social isolation that the pandemic brought to so many of us.
Yeah, but I would say you've been creating this amazing community for all these years because when somebody graduates college, I usually see photos of them and, because they used to be picking strawberries or whatever. So, but you did have an edge on a lot of people in terms of community because you had been working at this for a long time
and we trusted each other.
And effort and knowing medicine the way Elizabeth works in the medical realm, you guys had a great opportunity to be able to have friends around comfortably where everybody could be comfortable with it.
Right.
Yeah. So. Labor is an issue because you also don't like to just be at home all the time. I mean, you and Elizabeth both like to be able to travel out and see family and be at conferences and stuff. So
and that's
how do you
guys? That's one of the beauties of this. So, in fact, one summer, and farmers would understand this. One summer, we were gone mid-July to mid-August for a month. I had conferences, one in Belfast, Ireland, and one in Berlin, and they were almost a month apart. And I said, well, I'm just going to stay in Europe the full month. But it's like, I live on a farm. How can I possibly do that? Because that's there. There would be a lot of stuff you would have to pick, and there all this. Well, it didn't. I just kind of gave it up, and the co-op took care of it because when we're gone on vacation, they cover it. Now, we don't leave for a month every summer. No, that's a little too much. But that summer we were able to do that, and it was fine. People took care of everything. That is not something that most farmers can do. That's just too unusual. I get that, but that's one of the beauties of the way we've got it set up.
Yeah. And how often when you travel does something horrible happen at the farm when Elizabeth is in charge?
Well, she would say every time maybe, but it's not. It does
typically hit.
It does seem that I leave and something goes a little haywire, but
you're not setting her up?
I don't think so.
Do you know like what will happen like in your retirement? You said maybe you not be so big, but you got some young families in the group, or do you have a waiting list?
We do continue to get young families in the group, and some of us age out and stop working on the farm. One of the friends, John, when he retired, he started working on the farm a lot more because he had more time. So that's great. I'm pretty certain that when I retire, whenever that is, I'm not going to work more on the farm. I work enough now, and I just don't think that's realistic. I've probably reached my limit at how much I can do myself physically on the farm. That's a good question. What's the future of the farm as we age? Well, that's a conversation we have to have as a community and kind of figure all that out. And there's a balance between that. At some point, it becomes harder for me to do some of the labor, but I also know that if I stop doing the kinds of stuff I'm doing now in terms of exercise, I'm likely to lose even more.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that? And I've got bad knees, so at some point I'm going to have to deal with that.
You got time to figure it out.
But
I'm not trying to push you. I'm not trying to push you out.
Yeah,
right?
I might be your older brother, but I'm not that old.
But it doesn't take much to be old when you're throwing bales of hay, and when you're, there's some of the jobs that are pretty, and it's twisting with weight and stuff like that. So
Yeah, the throwing the hay is the time that I'm the most likely to exhaust myself. But I've been willing to pay for younger labor on those kinds of projects. So that's one of my ways to cope.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, I'm going to shoot some video and stuff outside so folks can see a little bit of the animals and stuff like that, so they can see what it looks like. Some of our friends have already seen it, but some haven't. We have white sheep, brown sheep, one little bitty black sheep, and maybe the others need to be bottle fed. I don't know.
Okay.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Okay, bye-bye.
I can admit now, it was a little intimidating to interview my brother. I've seen the farm and been able to go out and visit and different things, but like you do with most family, you don't ever actually interview family members. You have conversations with them, you get bits and pieces, but it was so cool to just sit down and have this 30 minutes where we just straight talked about what was happening in the farm now and how they started it, all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate the excuse to have this conversation with my brother. We did, for the video, we went out and got to meet some of the animals, see some of the animals, and now he's dealing with a lot of little piggies since I've been there. This was recorded in late May, and it was still kind of damp and cool. Even his sweatshirt kind of matches the barn that I call purple. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, share it with somebody else and make sure you catch the videos, because you're going to see those little baby lambs and be like me, like, oh my goodness, they're adorable. I need sheep. All right, we'll talk to you guys again in 2 weeks. Thank you.